Hey everyone, so welcome back to the another series in the Holo JavaScript. So today we're going to see and discuss about the block level and what is shadowing in JavaScript, and also we're going to discuss about what is naming conflict and so much of things that is related to block level scope we're going to discuss. So before that, we will see some of them previously in the previous series that we have discussed about that where the latent const variables when they are declared in globally or where they are declared what's happened, we see that they have a separate reserved space in the name of script, right? So we cannot access those things before initiation, so they are also hoisted but we cannot access it, right? So we see that the let and const has a separate reserved space, right? So same like that here we're going to see about blocks. So let's see what, first of all, see what is block. Okay, so if I say block, actually what is block? It is simply a block is something, the name itself you can able to see block is a group of things, right? So the block is something that makes the codes group together, and we can able to group the codes together, and whenever we want that we can send that block as a single statement. For example, what is the syntax that we use to write our code? This means this curly braces, right? So this is actually the block space. So this is actually block space. So whatever we want to block it group together, we will write it here. You can able to see if you have a function, if you have a function, right? If you have a function and we will give the name and we will use this block. So why we are giving this block? Because we need to group together. What if I don't give anything and I simply say like this console.log hello, like this, okay, instead of using this, and if I ask for name to execute, okay, and if I run this code, you can able to see identifier window syntax error. The reason why it is functions are used to run a block of code, so this is not a valid syntax. But the same thing we can able to make this valid when we are using arrow function, right? So how? For example, I just remove the const and we have this function like this. You can now you can able to see now this is also a function, but it what we can able to achieve without using the block, without using the curly braces, we can able to run the code, right? So I just want to mention the name. Okay, so now we run it, we can execute this hello, right? So that is the syntactic sugar that was made in the arrow function. So you may see that there are so much of updations here, but one of the thing. So thing is here, so when it is a single line, which means a single line of statement, you don't want a block because the block is used to group together. So here I'm not grouping anything, I just have one line to execute. So just as it is we can execute, that is we can able to achieve it with function. So let us do another thing. For example, which place, what is the another place that where we use the block level in conditional statements, like, so if you see the syntax of if is just simply like this, true, and we will having this block, right? Actually this block is not an syntax of if. So whenever we want to use a block of code, so when the condition is true, when I want to execute a block of statement, so then you can use this syntax. So if you don't have block of code, you have only single line code like this, uh, what you can do, you can simply write it next to it. For example, console.log hello, like this. So what's going to happen, let me see, it will not throw any errors. The reason why it is, this block level is used to group things together. So but here we don't have any group things. The syntax of if is that's it. But when we are using the function syntax itself as a blocking things like the curly braces, so that's why it's taken. But in arrow function you can able to see only for grouping. So this is a great example. Only for grouping, when you have a block of code to execute, in that time only you need to use you can use the curly braces and return statement to return something in the function. So that is an explanation they are saying, like whenever you want to use the block level, you can use this block curly brace, other than you don't want to use it. So this syntax is absolutely valid. Okay, so this is actually called as block space, and simply without writing anything, whatever we want to write here, we can able to write it here. For example, var a equal to 10, and I say let b equal to 20, and const c equal to 30. It is possible, yes, of course it is possible. If I run it, you don't see any syntax error. It is completely valid syntax. This itself a JavaScript code, the JavaScript syntax, it's a block level syntax. And you know that var variable we cannot access outside, and we only access the latent const inside that. But we need to know how it is created, right? So let us go and just go for the inspect, go for the console, and now go for the source, go for the snippets. Okay, I just create an new snippets. Okay, so here we will copy down our code to understand what is happening in the memory allocation and what has happened in before. We have discussed that whenever we are declaring a variable with latent const, those memory var variable it goes in the global space, but latent const they have a separate reserved space and be something named as script, right? So that's what we have discussed. So now we just start with debugger code. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I just going to write debugger here itself. Okay, so now I just start to execute the code. So now we can able to see we have this debugger here. So now we can able to see what is happening, whether before resource space we have the hoisting and what will happen. So it is as in resource space, right? So now you can able to see in the scope we actually have two scopes. One is the block and another one is going to be the global scope as usual, right? So you can able to see when let and const or inside a block level, you can see a separate scope is created, block in the name of block. They are not the same scope when they are outside. For example, I just create in another variable like let d equal to 12. Okay, and if I what I can do, I just run it again, and now you can able to see. Okay, I just want to write it again. Just cut this one. I just cut this one. Okay, I will remove this and add a new snippet, and here we will paste this one, and here I just add let d equal to 12. So we know that when we are declaring a variable in global space, the let keyword is stored in a separate scope, right? The resource space script in scope we have mentioned script. But the same thing here, you can see when the let and var is declared, they are in another scope, block level, right? Let's see what is happening here. If I run, you can able to see the difference of scopes has been created. When the let and var are created inside a block level, they are in different scope, block level scope. And when we are in the global scope, we have different scope, that is the script. So when we have the var variable, right, when we are in the var variable, that is in the global scope. When it is in function, it is in function local scope. It is so accessible only inside the function. So we only accessible only when the function is get executed. So inside only we can execute it. So only difference is global scope and block level scope. So this is the difference you need to understand. The let keyword, how the memory spaces happen. But one thing here it is that is completely acceptable. Every whatever the scope they are in, that is not a matter, but they are hoisted. But because of those hoisting takes place in script, which means some reserved space, we cannot access the let and const variable before the initiation, but they are hoisted, but we cannot access it. That is the true part. So now here we can understand when we declare a variable with let and const, so it is inside a separate scope, that is block level. So because of this, what we can achieve, we can able to access those values variables only inside the function, inside that block level, right? So but you can able to see when I declare a variable with var, it is in a different scope. You can able to see the values also, it is in different scope, we can able to access it. Same like that when we are declared in let outside, so it is in script tag, so we can able to access it. So that is why here everywhere we are creating the let and const, it is if I created globally, then it has a reserved space, and if I created it in function, then it is inside a function. When I created a let and const, then it's create a separate space that is called as block, and inside the blocks they are acceptable and they are in. Okay, so that's what happening. And meanwhile, if you are creating another block, and here I just say const l equal to 12, like this. Okay, so now I just use to run again. Okay, I think it is not executed. Okay, just a minute, I just cut the debugger, cut. Now we create, yeah, we created here. So if I try to run, now you can see const l, where, yeah, now you can able to see when the line of block is reached, you can see here. So if I go for the next line, when var it is executed, then go for the next line, and then go for the next line, you can able to see, and another variable is created, the name of l here. You can able to see when it reaches this block level scope, you can see a separate block level is created. So with what we can understand, every block creates a separate scope for themselves. For example, it is inside this block level only, but when I created a new block, it has separate block and those values are inside it, which means whatever I declared with let and const in this block, it is accessible only that block, we cannot access outside. Okay, so that is what happening here. That is why we cannot access the block level scopes in let and const, because they are creating a separate scope, and that is accessible only when they are that is really accessible when we are in that space. Okay, so that is called as lexical environment, or we can say JavaScript is lexically scoped. So what is mean by that? So mean that, so where the variable is declared, that is matter, right? So here the variable where it is here, so here inside this block, then I can able to access those variable inside that only. Okay, so if the variable is here, I can able to access the value inside that only. So if it is in global, I can able to access the value in global space. So that's what happening. So in JavaScript, the variables are lexical scopes. That is what happening. So how it is happening? Because in JavaScript, when we declared with var, then that is absolutely fine. So var does not have a block level scope. It does not create a special scopes for block. It just add in the global space only. So that is why it is accessible everywhere. And if it is in function, then that is completely different. It is accessible only inside a function. We cannot access it outside. But in case of block level, when we are using let and const, the let and const create a separate level of block. Okay, so each and every block they create a separate scope, which means the separate space where we can able to assign a value and take the value, use the value, and whatever we want to do, we can able to do it. Okay, so that's what happens, that's what happens here. Okay, so fine. So now we move to what is shadowing. Okay, what is shadowing here? They just remove these things, snippets, remove the snippets. I just go for shadowing, and let me discuss this. So what is mean by shadowing is, so shadowing is simply that is pretty related to naming conflict, but not exactly. Okay, so in functions, for example, we have like let a equal to 10. Okay, so it is a global scope. And if I created a function with b, and this b function, if I want to, if I say a is equal to 12, now what's going to happen? We can access the value in the global scope, and we are using here, right? So if I say console.log a, and if I run it, or if I say b, if I run it, you can see we will get the value 12. And if I remove this, and if I run it, you can able to see get the value 10. so we can able to access it. But when we declared the same identifier name with let, so now what happens? So this is something called as naming conflict. So this is in different scope and this is in different scope. So but even though we know that this global scope we have access to it, right? But when we declare the same identifier name inside a functions with the declaration keyword, then what's going to happen? The naming conflict is happen, which means we no longer have access to this global variable. We just lost the connection between the global variable and the scope. So we are only looking, just take this value and we will execute, and it does not throw any error. That is the best part of it. Okay, does not throw any error. So this is naming conflict. So this is same way what is called as shadowing also, but not in the function scope. Let's see it in block level scope. Okay, so if I create like this true or like this, and here if I ask let a equal to 10 like this, and if I clear and simply run it, nothing. So here I just ask for console.log a, and we know that it doesn't throw any error. Okay, so this is actually called as shadowing here. So what is happening here, it is just shadowing the variables, and what it is here, it is just we are doing that and we are getting the value. But what if I declare a variable with var? So the var variable, it is in global, and if I do it in with let, so instead of this let we have let variable and we have var. So now if I try to do this, we will get an error and telling that identifier A has already declared. Why? Because the reason, it is in different scope. Remember that it is in different scope. It is in a reserved space and it is in a different scope. And this var is trying to shadow the variable here, right? So that is why it's saying that identifier A has already declared. We cannot do this. But it is acceptable when a variable with var and we tell to create it in let. Why? Let's see here. If I run, just simply it executes. Why? Because it's in global variable, and the shadowing part, it is going to be in the newly created block level scope, right? So it is completely acceptable. It is completely acceptable and we can able to use it. So this is actually called as shadowing. We can able to use it until if the var is does not cross the line. For example, if you use the same thing, for example, you have right now, you can see if I say declared with let and it declared with var, it is throwing me an error. Why? Because it is crossing its limit. So the limit is here. Until is inside that scope, it is valid, completely valid. But unfortunately, var does not have block level scope, so it does not valid. But if I do the same thing for a function like this, function c, and here if I call var a equal to 10, and if I ask for console.log a, and now if I run this code, clear, and I need to call the function, see, run this code, it is valid. Why? The reason it is, if we want to see, I just want to give it. Why? Because the var variable is limited. So it is inside this only, right? So it is inside this, the var variable is inside that function only. So it is not interfere with the scope of a. So whatever we can able to declare the same identifier name, we can able to give it. But when I declared the same thing when with the if class or rather block level scope, it does not work like that. Why? Because the var scope does not have the limit over the block level, so it is considered as a global scope only. So already and reserved space is occupied for a, so we cannot shadowing those things to interfere that particular variable that is already created. Okay, so that is completely not possible. So that's why it's throwing an error. But here it is absolutely possible. Okay, you can able to use it until. So the simple takeaway here is block level is whatever, it's simply grouping things together, and whenever we want we can execute as a single statement. Okay, like if class, functions, everything is doing the same, and we will use the curly braces to block the things together, which means group the things together. So whenever we are creating let and const, the let and const, for every blocks they created a block scope separately, and the memories are reserved in that block scope only. So we cannot access outside and we only access inside, but when we declared with var keyword we can able to access it in the global scope also. So that is the takeaway. And second one is shadowing. So until unless the var keyword is not manipulating or it's not disturbing the scope of the latent cons, it can able to use the same identifier, which means the shadowing will take, it is possible. But in var scope it is not like that. The var keyword is interact like it is like a global scope, so it is completely not possible. So it will be throw us an error. Okay, so that's what you need to do. And naming conflict. So when we declared with the same name, so that is that's considered as a naming conflict, so we lost access to the global scope. That is the shadowing actually. So we lost the access and we will use the whatever the new name we given inside, that we will use it. Okay, so that is called as naming conflict. So that's all for today. So the next class we will discuss about one of the important concept, that is going to be the closure. So if you have any doubts, tell it in the comment box. We will reply as soon as possible. Thank you.